we're going to get on with the afternoon now. So the next part of this day is a conversation about virtual reality. I hesitate to say this summit's the summit of virtual reality because we had many other technologies, but it's clear to me, I was in reviewing a lot of the demo applications, that a lot of the enthusiasm we've seen for mobile over the last few years has essentially shifted into VR and AR. That's where the enthusiasm on the campuses has gone. So we wanted to convene a panel that would talk about the near term, next sort of 3 years around VR and AR, the commercial and the storytelling opportunities in these media, and other opportunities, I should say. And so we've invited a sort of expert panel to help us have that conversation. And I'm going to ask them to come on out onto the stage now, and we'll get started. So I've got Kai Bond, who's a general manager of the Samsung Accelerator here in New York. So Kai, welcome.
Thank you.
Looks like Ken Perlin's next. Ken Perlin, who is at the NYU Media Lab and is director of the Games for Learning Institute there, and is grown a beard since the last time I've seen it. Looking very good. Adaora Udoji, who's going to come out now, who is at ITP and an angel investor in virtual reality. And next, Jake Zim. And Jake just recently got the words VR in his title at Sony, and so that's exciting. We're beginning to see that type of thing happen in many companies where those words are actually now in the titles of senior executives, and I think that's part of the conversation that we want to have today. By the way these guys are going on backstage, I know this is going to be a good conversation. I'm going to encourage you all to feel free to talk amongst yourselves as much as you pay any attention to me, because all of you know 1,000 times more about this subject than I do. And I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A. So we're literally going to do about half the time to Q&A. So make sure you're preparing your questions in the audience. And I think because we are at the NYC Media Lab Summit, and this is all about sort of connecting industry with universities, I might start by asking Ken Perlin a question. And when I ask a question, you guys feel free to sort of introduce yourselves in more depth than I just did.
Okay.
But Ken, you're fond of saying 2018 is really the year of VR. That's when it's really going to happen. Why?
Well, most of you know about Google Daydream, which is kind of the Gear VR killer, and
Sorry.
It starts right off the bat.
I'm not swinging, Ken.
Here we go.
Jeez.
yeah. Although then they'll come back with something even better. But the reason is because the Gear VR and all this stuff has to move out of orientation only and use one technology or another to get to 6 degree of freedom tracking, and then that's the next thing. And I think that if you just follow Moore's law, you look at things like Tango and its competitors, I'd say around 2018 is when the phone itself, the device everyone has in their pocket, is going to do full 6 degree of freedom tracking. And at that point, the VR and the mixed reality are going to have this really interesting convergence in terms of what content creators can make. So I think there are people already thinking about that, but that's when it's going to hit hundreds of millions of people.
And you think that because that's going to enable social interaction in virtual reality?
Yeah, in our lab we like to say the holodeck is other people,
So, we heard about the holodeck from Wynn Burleson earlier today, so
right.
You can tell us more about that as well. Kai, maybe I'll let you give a retort then to Ken. Is 2018 the year of VR? Are we going to see articles in 2017, it didn't happen, it's not taken off, it's 3D TV all over again?
I don't know if it's going to be 3D TV, but I think, as we see network speed, phone hardware increasing, Ken talks about Moore's law a lot, and I think we're at a place where the pace of advancement in the VR industry, because of the network build-out, because of the hardware that's there, will allow us to get multiplayer, right? And that's really, today you're looking at a single-player experience, right? And if you look at, other industries in gaming, what takes off, right? It's multiplayer. And once we break out of that, I think we'll really start seeing it hit the masses in a different way.
And what are you working on in the Accelerator that might hasten that along?
Right. So, we invest in several areas. So, one part of the stack that we look at is UGC, right? And a lot of the things that we look at in terms of 360 video, photos, live streaming, I really think those are sort of the gateway drug, right, into true VR, right? It's very accessible for a broad audience, and it starts to get people understanding really what the capabilities are. And then we look at a lot of platform tools, right? So things like major problems you have today in VR. We've seen some cool stuff today, but input, right? Input's still a challenge, right? You're blindfolded and you're fumbling around the side of your head to try to get input in the right way. So whether that's gesture input from a smartwatch, whether that's actually being able to do actual hand and control in VR, those are the types of technologies that are actually going to move it forward and make it more accessible.
Adaora, I want to come to you. Maybe, and we'll talk about storytelling a little bit, because a lot of people are talking about this chicken and egg thing. The technology is coming along, but there's not enough good content. You just came from the 360 panel, I think, with the Associated Press, and you were saying, it's just obvious we're in such early days for what people are going to do with these new tools. What's holding us back on the storytelling front?
I'm just going to add to what they said. That multiplayer is key, but I think it's also all about what the experience will be. And what do I mean? I mean that we're at such a seeding stage, and there's such a convergence of the maturing technologies all happening at once. AR, VR, AI, and the experience that then creates, I don't think anybody knows exactly what that's going to be. I have a friend, Sofia Dominguez, who writes the newsletter All Things VR, who makes the argument that by 2018, in the next 3 years, it's all going to be a verb. It's not going to be delineated by the type of technology that's driving it. It's going to be the experience itself, and I think part of that is going to be the narrative. We know what gaming looks like, but in the world of VR 360 or CGI, I mean, there's a continuum there, right, of agency, there's a continuum of experiences, there's a continuum of the experience given the ability to see 360 video or the ability to manipulate, animation in new and different ways. And we're just learning how to produce those things and what that narrative might be. And part of it is getting the storytellers involved. Spielberg or whoever you want to talk about, Shonda Rhimes, writing to what the technology is allowing us to create at this point. And I think there's so much attention, which has been great this year, but this idea that somehow this was going to be the year where VR just simply explodes, I mean, we really are in early days yet.
Jake, maybe I'll get you to build on that. And again, the new title, the new effort at Sony. What's driving your commercial interest in this medium?
Well, my role specifically is at the movie studio, and what I oversee is the business for the Sony Pictures Entertainment Group, the movie studio's position in virtual reality and immersive entertainment going forward. So for us, obviously, as a corporation, we have a very strong vested interest in virtual reality with our PlayStation VR product. And as storytellers, as movie makers, television producers, we're very ingrained in the concept that Adaora is referring to, really, which is let's build a story from multiple points of talented input, whether it's writing, cinematography, direction, sound design. Let's find a way to create a product that can fit on a medium. And in this case, with VR, the medium is fluid, it's variable, it's new, it's emerging. So the fun, exciting thing that I get to do every day is try to find ways to put all those talented artists together who are very good at traditional storytelling, and then find a way to introduce them to this world of game design and interaction and this entirely new technology that allows for presence and agency, and try to find a way to put that all together to create a high-quality story that fits for the format. And so what drives us in terms of our projection of where the business is going has to start with content. It has to start with the sort of connection of those points, interactivity, narrative, but with a a guideline of why this has to be in VR and why you, as an audience member, have to participate in whatever story it is we're offering.
And you all have built some notable experiences lately. Everybody talks about Ghostbusters. Everybody's talking about the Ghostbusters in the back.
Yeah, so we're very proud of what we've put out there so far, and certainly Ghostbusters, which is a walk-around virtual reality experience at Madame Tussauds on 42nd Street in town with the company called The Void, which is sort of one of these premier walk-around VR multiplayer experiences. That's a project that I think is a good example of how we took traditional narrative franchise Hollywood types, Ivan Reitman, who came up with the Ghostbusters franchise concept, and worked with all of the creative assets from the movie, including all the CG models and renders and environments that were built for the movie and the franchise over many years. And then sat down with the team at The Void, who really understood this platform that they had built and developed, and how the tracking systems would work, and how to deal with peripherals. You actually walk around with a gun, which is, of course, the proton blaster, and you have a haptic vest with a backpack, and you're in there busting ghosts.
Don't cross the streams.
Yeah, don't cross. Well, you do have to. You haven't done it yet.
You have to do it ultimately.
You have to do it. You got to cross the streams to win.
So there are a lot of people here who had demos earlier around VR and AR, and people who want to build this future. They want to make this thing happen. So there are students, faculty, companies here that want to hasten, the emergence of VR and AR. And maybe from first the tech side and then back to the storytelling, what should they be working on to make that sort of 2018 thing come true? What should they be working on? Where is there value to be created? Where is there real opportunity? And maybe Kyle, start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So I saw a lot of great stuff today in the VR room, and a lot of great tech in general. I spent some time with a woman who's an occupational therapist, right? And I think we talk about gaming and we talk about storytelling, but she's working with autistic children, right? And having that experience of what does a normal day look like for someone, right? And so I think we get caught up oftentimes in terms of what is the entertainment value, right? What is the Pokemon Go experience going to look like? But there are real practical solutions that are actually impacting individuals' lives, right? And to me, there needs to be a balance when we think about what is the entertainment value, right? What is the storytelling? And again, how does this technology actually impact lives in a meaningful way? And some of what we're seeing in terms of dealing with PTSD and autism are really fascinating, right? And to me, that's where you're seeing a lot come out. I know I've had the opportunity to play around with Cognizant, which is built by a couple of neuroscientists that came out of Columbia. Fascinating stuff. And so those are the types of experiences I think are really going to move the needle for people.
Ken, what is your lab working on? What should the others here be working on to kind of...
So our... I love what you guys did with Ghostbusters and The Void, and at the same time, I also think that you're doing the only thing that you can do in 2016, and we're a little bit like, I think everyone here has said, you've said it's early days. It's kind of like, where the web was in 1995, and you had to go to an internet cafe. And, and then eventually there were no internet cafes because you just had that at home, and eventually you had it on your phone. And so I think you have to go high-end now, but you're not going to have to go high-end. I think one of the most important things that happened in the last year was the Pokemon Go phenomenon, because it affirmed that people like to hang out with other people, and that's cross-generational, and it's not just kids. And now, I carry around this, this is like a little Homido that I bought on Amazon Prime for, $15, and I hook it up to my phone, and when I want to show somebody a VR demo, I just go to the web, and I'm showing them virtual reality, and it's easy, there's no... And
I'm going to take a picture of you doing that, because that's great right there, so I didn't mean to interrupt,
right,
but that's
great.
fantastic.
This is, all right, this is an historical moment or something?
Yeah, this is important.
Gosh. So that's going to show up on social media.
Ken's a blogger, but not a tweeter.
That's right. I'm a blogger, not a tweeter. But the reason that's significant is, and all my students have these things now, and a lot of my colleagues do. And the point is that anywhere we go, we have today's version of VR, and it's not that far from the thing getting a little faster, and that that camera there, and suddenly you and I are sharing an experience. We're like this close to that. And when that happens, it's going to be like going from, oh, you needed to have a high-end multi-million-dollar studio to make a movie, to the YouTube phenomenon. And you suddenly have millions of people just saying, I'm just going to make stuff for my friends. And it's not going to replace the high-end franchises, but it's going to enrich the whole ecosystem in a very exciting way.
And now maybe Adaora and Jake onto the storytelling side. For the storytellers in the room, what should they be focused in on?
But I would actually, just to respond to your original question, I mean, the bottom line is anything. When you're asking the question of how can I jump into this? I've seen companies in education, medical, where it's robotics and VR. I've seen real estate, Matterport, they use that in the example in 360. What I find interesting, and I don't know how this is going to bear out relative to adoption rates, is with computers, most of the population had the first contact with computers at work because you didn't have the internet. It was used for a specific purpose at work. The thing that makes VR and AR different in my mind is you're just as likely to come into contact with it at work as you are in your personal life. And it's happening simultaneously. In other words, Pokemon Go is happening, right now. Your 10-year-old is maybe obsessed with it, and so you get into it, and maybe you're at work and you work in construction or architecture or real estate, and you're also working with computer visualization and 3D rendering and so on and so forth. So I find that whatever, and you're saying that you were talking about occupational therapists, I mean, I know pain VR company, I mean, the list is endless. Any sector or category that you can imagine, there is somebody who's taking a look at how this new technology may make that industry more efficient, may provide something new or different, some component that industry hasn't had access to before. So whatever your interest might be, my guess is that there is some application.
Mm-hmm. Jake, what's missing right now? What do you wish you could go out and work with?
Well, what we try to do is frame entertainment virtual reality in 3 buckets, 3 criteria that we start to work from to create what we would consider a quality VRE, virtual reality experience. And the first is environments. What kind of environments are you building that will really leverage the concepts that work in virtual reality? We know that scale works really well in VR. Perspective, when you're on the top of a building looking down, when you're a little Smurf and everybody's big, Gargamel and Azrael are big. Scale is really, really cool. People like to look up and they like to look down. So what environments are you building that will allow for that? The second is narrative. So narrative, it's the story. Why are you there? What role do you have to play? Who will you interact with? What kind of urgency will be part of the story that will drive you to move through it? And then friction. And this sort of borrows from game design theory, but the idea is there are a set of rules that you learn and abide by, but what happens when those rules break, or you have to find ways to increase your skill level to move through this world that has been created so that it's fun. And ideally, the confluence of those 3 criteria create an experience that is replayable and ideally social. But the ultimate metric of success that we go for is it's qualitative. When someone takes the headset off, how big are their pupils? How crazy do they look? And do they literally turn to their friend and say, you got to try this right away? Because that's the kind of one-to-one feedback that we have right now in VR. And to get there, until this can be a one-to-many word-of-mouth conversation, which is going to take a while because people have to understand what virtual reality is, and we're not there yet. In order to get there, we focus on those 3 areas to build what we would consider quality VREs.
And let me push you just a little bit, because Kai, I know you've got lots of specific ideas about if you were, because you're kind of a startup entrepreneur at heart. If you were not working in the Accelerator, what would you go out and start tomorrow? Maybe give us a couple of things, because I've heard you say some very specific things that you'd like to see entrepreneurs going on about.
Yeah, so I think this idea of something like the Void, where there's a destination, right, where it's very much constructed and made, I think we're going to think about open space as being the new creative platform, right? There won't be a sense of a destination per se, but you want that freedom of motion. Jake and I were talking about this before, which is, if you see some of these crazy things, I went and played around with Modal VR last week when I was in San Francisco, and they would take people out to soccer fields. And the experience, you would see people would come back and they lose complete track of where they are. How far did I go? Was I by the goal, or did I walk just 20 yards over here, right? So the idea that, and we had this conversation, there's a gentleman here who was in a panel with me last night, that you're spending an hour inside of VR, and you take it off, and you're like, I think I was in there for about 10, 15 minutes maybe, and you look, and you're like, oh my God, right? And so, the experiences that I think are particularly interesting are mobile experiences. We focus a lot on mobile VR, and there are experiences in which you will wander and be totally free, right? And you won't be tethered. And right now, room scale is fascinating, and everyone absolutely loves it. But there will be positional tracking at wide scale.
And that's all new, though. I mean, wouldn't you guys all say? I mean, I don't even think 6 months or a year ago you could stay in it, a lot of it, for an hour.
Well, the velocity of all of this is it's crazy. It's nuts. And we will continue to see the opinion stories about VR is not going to work or this didn't take off and so on. But that doesn't matter. That's all noise, because just the pure inertia that is behind this whole movement and the direction it's going, and there is a commercial place for it. There's no question. We've looked at that deeply. And there are commercial and other types of applications for VR and AR and mixed reality that are just moving this forward in a way that's going to continue to achieve something. It's just all of the pieces of the puzzle need to fit in at the right time. Yep. And from our point of view, we just have to focus on making the things great for people to experience.
Add to that, I mean, I think what Adaora said is crucial in that this is not. This is a fundamental medium. This is like book printing. This is like the web. It's not about a particular use. It's about all possible uses. And we're also in the first wave. And basically, the iPhone came out in 2007, and a number of people realized that you just take a technology from 1851, the stereoscope, and you put it together with the iPhone, and like a lot of people realized that at once, and there's this whole hobbyist movement that started. But frankly, putting something like this for most of what you're doing, this big brick that's meant for direct viewing, like this, isn't where we're going to go. But once this market builds, then there are already, NVIDIA and all these major players are already working on things that look a lot more like that. A tiny little screen that's 4K, that goes here. The thing is that until the market builds, those people can't come out with that second wave thing. And so we're building from Victorian technology, but we're not going to stay there. And so this whole thing is going to accelerate once all of that plays out, which will be not in the next 3 years, but in the next 5 years.
So you all travel the country, travel the world, looking at VR and AR technologies, stories. Let's talk a little bit about the geography of VR right now. I hear a lot of enthusiasm for what's going on in New York, of course, because that's where we're at. But it seems like there's a very hot scene, obviously, in Los Angeles. The Bay Area is leading. What can New York do? What should New York do to sort of catch up, hold a candle to those other two markets?
Oh, we're way ahead of them.
You think we're way ahead?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ken.
We're the content people.
We're the content.
We're culture. We're publishing. We're finance. We're everything. Come on, aren't we the coolest city in the world?
Yeah.
Kai, do you agree?
I think we're doing a great job. I think, when you think about film, you think about LA, right? And you think about great storytelling, you think about, cinematography, and certainly there are great producers who live in New York and spend a lot of time here. But, I think what you're seeing with some of the high-end stuff right now is LA is doing a tremendous job, right? You see what's going on in San Francisco with some of the core tech. So I wouldn't say it's a, New York versus LA versus San Francisco. I saw a company from the Midwest last night. Movio was fascinating, right? I was like, how can I get inside of one of these? When are you bringing it to New York? Where are you setting it up? Why is it not in my office to play around with? And so, I don't see it as a who's in first, second, or third, but what are the strengths of each market and how you play into those. And that's a very natural evolution, right? It's going to be the same thing that happened on the web, right? You see a lot of people who come out of New York who are fashion tech, fintech, and it leads here. Why? Because we had a ton of banking. We had a ton of fashion. You have real estate here. And each market will play out and do what they do well in that particular vertical.
It's global, though, and I would also say, and Ken, as I would refer to him, as like an original gangster. VR is not new. People have been working on this for decades. decades and decades and decades and decades. And original techie gangster. But the point is that there are pockets all over the world of people who have been working on a variety of different parts of this. And even Kai, you guys had in your Accelerator an amazing AR company, you know, the Northern European. The name of the company escapes me. But whatever the case, that you see it in South Africa. I mean, I was working with a VC firm that's funded companies in about 6 continents. You know, in South America, you see things particularly in Eastern Europe. And in Asia, I mean, some of the eye tracking, some of the most sophisticated eye tracking development has come out of a company called Fove, and that's a Japanese company. So I think so much of it has to do with the expertise and passion, and those pockets exist, and now those people are sort of riding a wave of greater awareness and greater accessibility to some of this technology.
It really is global, and I think that's what is maybe most exciting about the prospects for these types of immersive platforms, because you have expertise coming from so many different places. The Void guys are based outside of Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. In LA, we have movie and TV expertise, and that's what we do very, very well, but we have a real need to figure out what the next platform for entertainment is. We have to figure that out. In San Francisco, in the Bay Area, you've got technology. You've got technology all over the place. New York, of course. What I think New York really brings to the table, if we want to get specific, is a real understanding of live entertainment. Mm-hmm. And live entertainment is a first cousin of what virtual reality is. The audience participates. You know, these punch-drunk shows, Sleep No More and Drown Man and things like that. These are exceptionally well suited for fitting into the language of virtual reality, where the audience plays a role. And that is a key learning that you get in this city, aside from all the incredible technology work and just brain power that's here. But the other thing that is really important is somebody has to figure out the marketing of virtual reality.
Yeah, that's a big one.
How do you explain, and this took a while, it takes a while for every technology. How do you explain to somebody that you're gonna appreciate putting this thing on, and maybe it's, someone else is wearing it, and you've got a hygiene thing, or setting up your light boxes, or plugging in, or going to the, you have to convince people that what they're going to go through, the costs that they're going to have to engage in this experience are going to be worth it. And you have to figure out how to do that in a video that will play in people's Facebook feeds, or during the big premiere of the TV show. You've got to find that out. And that is a thing that maybe the New York advertising scene can bring to the table. So there's a challenge, Ken.
Cool. Yeah, I actually think one of the intriguing things about Pokemon Go phenomenon was that nobody had to convince anybody of anything. So if something is kind of hitting the culture just right, it starts to spread itself.
But you could explain it very easily.
Yeah, that's right.
You walk around with your phone and you find Pokemon. And I have twin 5-year-old boys, and I'm dating myself, and I'm too old for Pokemon. I missed that wave. And my kids are 5, which is way too young, frankly, to be as engaged in this thing, let alone, they don't have their own phones, but they grab them from my wife and I all the time. But all they had to do was know that they could use a cool little lens that is a cool thing anyway, that they already intuitively know how to use, and go find little creatures, and then they could battle them and evolve them and all that stuff. I mean, that's pretty easy to explain to a 5-year-old. But you have to put a 5-year-old, and I'm not endorsing this, you have to put a 5-year-old in an HMD for them to understand what VR tilt brush painting is.
I want to let the audience ask some questions. So we have 2 microphones that are here, and I'll let you guys kind of take first crack at this. So I suspect we'll have a few questions for our panelists. I'll start right here with you, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you see AR, VR developing in a news context, because you haven't really addressed that so far here, and I think there's a lot of issues, and ethical issues, and then just interest issues, and et cetera. So I'd like to hear that.
Adora.
I just want to start with that. And the reason why is I was in broadcast news for about 15 years. And I think every single time, and particularly when I was in the AP, I worked for ABC News, I worked for CNN, I worked for public radio. I wish, and I covered it, I was a foreign correspondent for ABC News, so I covered wars, and I wish I would have had a theta during Katrina. that was the one story that it was an impossibility. There's no picture, there's no video that could ever even remotely begin to express the kind of devastation. I think there's tremendous potential, not just in devastation, but in contextualizing stories. I was so excited to hear about what the AP is doing and the amount of investment relative to people and equipment and experimenting, because at the end of the day, there's not a person on the planet who can tell you exactly how this should all work. From the production, from the hardware, the software, to the production, to the access, to the distribution of any of this. It's all experimental right now. But as a former broadcast journalist, I'm extraordinarily excited about the possibilities of the latest technology.
Yeah, I also wanted to add to that to me, the most significant moment personally in all of this was, I mean, I had a wake-up call the first time I saw the Valve demo, that then became the Vive, and I finally saw really high, good quality VR, and I said, okay, we have to work on this. But the moment for me that I think really I said this matters is when I was visiting my mom in her house in Rockland County, and my mom is 81, and she was just looking through her cardboard that she got from the New York Times at the Syrian refugees, and I was like, well, that matters. That's much more important than the mere gamers getting their hands on this.
A question here, sir.
Yeah, so thank you. So I'm really curious. I would love to hear what each of you think, or maybe a few of you think, about what is really driving us toward VR. I think, what is it about existing reality that is putting us in this direction, beyond sort of the entertainment sales, news coverage, information. What is it do you think that we're developing this for? And I would love to hear if you have any personal...
So what's so bad about reality that we need virtual reality? Well, Ken, maybe, or Jake.
Look, you want to see Death of a Salesman, you go to the theater. You want to see Son of Saul, you go to the movie theater. And like that's just a powerful cinematic experience. And there are things that should Jane Austen just work so incredibly well on the page. For every medium, there are things we want to do. And the reason we want to do them is we want to communicate with other people. And each medium is good. Not because as a gimmick in itself, long ago we moved beyond Méliès making people appear in a puff of smoke and the Lumiere brothers having trains come towards you. It's not about that. It's that any particular medium is better than the others at a particular way, if it's properly authored, to communicate with other people. And as time develops, we'll figure out this one.
Jake.
There are lots of theories on this, and I have multiple conversations with people all the time. It's a fantastic question. But at the core of it, this is a hypothesis that I think maybe we're working on. We live in an age where there's so much information, it's too much. It's crazy. It's too much. And so somewhere in our human existence, we want to return back to experiences. Information and experiences are different things. Experiences make us feel something. Information allows us to learn something. And if we think for a moment about what, at its core, virtual reality is, AR is a different conversation, but what VR forces you to do is it forces you to be present with yourself. Good VR. It makes you realize that you are somewhere that is different than where you were. Maybe you're next to that Syrian refugee in the classroom, and oh my goodness, this little girl's looking at me. I empathize. It forces you in some way to be present with yourself. And I think at the base core level of human existence, we all come back to that. Ideally, and I think that's why we all love these moments where you're in social real-time VR, because that is the tribal human nature. So if we can be present with ourselves and then present with other people, even though these might be avatars, somewhere in our lizard brain that says, ooh, this is exciting, this is cool, I want to get back to that.
Let's go to the question on this side.
Yes.
Is it on? Yeah. So you guys mentioned Pokemon Go a few times, right? Arguably, the technology for augmented reality has been in our pocket since 2006, 2005, right? The software has been there from SIGGRAPH experiments way before that, right? So the technology was ever present before someone decided to say, hey, content is king here. Once again, let's take a major brand that drives traffic and apply it. At what point, we're in a chicken and egg situation right now with VR. Is it going to be the goggles becoming commonplace or disappearing before a brand pushes it? Or is it going to be the brand pushing everyone's adoption of the goggles? It's tough.
Ken, what do you
Adaora?
No, I'd like to hear Ken.
We like to hear Ken.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm repeating myself. It's every medium is content creators, the medium itself. I don't think it doesn't, my dad used to tell me when I'd ask him an irrelevant question, he would say, so do you want to go to Brooklyn or by bus? You kind of need the medium and the content developers to find each other and understand what that thing is good for. And all the branding in the world isn't going to help unless you figure that out. I think what you were saying was directly right to the heart of I think, the answer to your question.
But I would say brands are easier for people, for markets, for consumers to understand. Pokemon Go took the ingress technology, the geocaching technology, the location-based phone technology, put a brand on it that is ubiquitous, has massive awareness, has canon, has mythology, has everything built into it, and it said, now we're going to tie all this together, and you could say, again, Pokemon Go on your phone. I get it. People, consumers, need to have a byline to understand the product they're buying. It's sampling. And Ken's right. You have to have the perfect marriage of technology and concept to move everything forward. But the shortcut, and this is why we make sequels and reboot movies all the time, is because, frankly, people get it much quicker and easier and more efficiently until everything else catches up.
I also think that there's an aspect of content creators understanding the medium, right? So when you think about, creating a game for a console, and you think about how you create a mobile game, which is one-hand, quick, snack bite content versus sitting down for an hour and playing an MMO, individuals learn how to master their craft after they have a bit of time and experience, right? The first motion picture is very different than what we know of today, and there is still very early days. Like, you've been in VR and AR for a long time. Most people and most startups that you're looking at, most content creators, have been doing this for less than a year, less than 18 months. And so everyone has not completely mastered their craft, right? The Void is an amazing experience. Is it going to get better? Absolutely. It's just a matter of time. And so I think that's really what it comes down to when you think about content creators mastering a craft is key to unlocking the potential of the technology.
Let's go to a question here. And I want to make sure we get to all these who are standing. So let's try to move quick.
I was just thinking about the future and how to immerse people more into the technology, and I've heard about audio through conducting to the bone, and how it's possible in the future that would be kind of like a standing thing that everybody will have. But I haven't heard of anything in terms of the visuals. So I was wondering if you guys have heard of any companies developing contact lenses or something like that.
Developing, I'm sorry. I missed
Contact lens interfaces.
Oh,
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I don't think it's primarily a technological issue. I think it's that, when you gradually go from the brick on your face to those glasses he's wearing to, it becomes something that people take for granted and is just part of their everyday lives. That, in 1963, if you talked about lasers, people would think about death weapons to against the Russian enemy, and then at some point it's like, oh, I had lasers, and people weren't freaked out by that. So I think once everybody is seeing the virtual world floating there as a normal everyday thing, then they'll have the contact lenses, they'll get implants. Like, oh, your kid got implants, my kid has to get implants, they compete with you in school. But that's 15, 20 years from now. That's generational. So it's not a technological limitation. It's us understanding what our shared reality is and then having technology follow along.
Didn't I see a TechCrunch article about a Samsung patent on contact lens interface?
Oh, I think a lot of tech companies
Yeah.
have contact lenses. That Microsoft, Google,
Yep.
Samsung, that technology exists. Again, it comes down to what is the application for it, right? What's that human experience? I think one of the areas that we find challenging in terms of audio, right? When you are in this environment and mobile, and you want to really understand that a plane is flying over and it's very different when it's coming towards you, and where are you positioned in that space. Those types of things are very challenging, but visual input will continue to improve because the screens are going to get better and the hardware is going to get better over time.
I'm going to stay on this side and take a question from you.
Sure. So I'm a journalist, and it's great that you guys are talking about it, but also overwhelming, because if you look at some journalism organizations, they're still struggling to get on board with Snapchat. There are some people doing it well, but for the most part, it's just videos and circles. But do you ever see virtual reality lending itself well to, in terms of production, to covering breaking news, for example? Yes.
Huge problem with workflows in newsrooms. This stuff's still pretty hard to do. Adaora.
But what I'm taking from your question is binary. Right? In other words, it's going to be the legacy or incumbent companies. There are a whole slew of startups, for example, Emblematic Group. Noni De Palma is extraordinary with these experiences that she's built. Speaking of the Syrian refugees, she did a Trayvon Martin. They've got several new ones and their experiences. She's hacking through what that process might look like. And as we know, Moore's Law, eventually, over time, it gets standardized and it gets cheaper and it gets more efficient. She has created, I get these people just sitting here talking to you. It's one thing to hear a reporter talk at you or to read something, right, online or, in, God forbid, paper. But it's another thing to experience it in three dimensions. She's not alone. There's a series of companies that I've come across, and there's even one that I may invest some money in, who are doing some really interesting things. And at some point, and the legacy companies, all of them have at least one person who's their VR person at this point, and they're watching and waiting, and some of them are doing a better job, I think, of experimenting than others. Ergo, my point earlier about the AP, I think it's extraordinary what they're doing.
I don't even know if it is the existing legacy media companies that are actually going to be the winners, right?
Exactly.
I mean, in every industry, as you see the evolution of online, you have new news organizations that have come out, leverage what online distribution can do. A lot of media businesses are holding on to their existing business, which is a subscription business in print, and figuring out how they can charge money and monetize online. You won't necessarily say they're the industry leader when it comes to online media. And I don't know if they'll be the winners in any sort of VR 360 mixed reality either.
So the typical cycle will play out. Yes, sir.
So my question is, we have a good amount of dialogue about entertainment, about storytelling, mostly focused on the consumer side. I want to see if you can elaborate a little bit of the VR implications in the enterprise side, how you see that evolving in the next few years.
VR in the enterprise. Kai?
Sure. So, I think we see actually quite a few companies right now coming out in the real estate industry that are, architecture, where you can actually do, room scale and understand what's going on. We've seen interesting AR companies in construction, right, when they're going in and you have a general contractor who's bringing in electricians, plumbers, right, figuring out where they're going to hang stuff. So I think that the technology will sort of play out like it always does, right? Which is, how do we create efficiency in a business first, right? And a lot of the tools that we're seeing now are saying, this is a problem, how can we leverage this tech to make it more efficient? Over time, when it becomes really fun is when it becomes disruptive, right? And so enterprise, we're seeing healthcare, we're seeing real estate. There's a ton of industries that are leveraging it right now, and I think it's again, like all the other mediums, very early. You may not hear about them because they have not become cultural phenomenon, right? They're not going to touch 50, 60, 70 million people who have an iPhone. It's very much a vertical focus, but when you talk to the individuals in that industry and the impact it's having over what they're doing, they're the ones who are probably feeling it the most.
Yeah. And also, just take one example among many. Let's say you're building a new building in Manhattan. There are 5 different unions. There's the electrical, there's the plumbing, there's like all these different. They all now, it's incredibly inefficient. They have to print everything out on paper and they have to distribute those plans. But the technology exists and people are working on making this available. It's like they all sit around a table. That, the thing they're building is floating in front of them. What happens if I move this here? What happens if I move this here? And this is going to save them millions of dollars and allow people to do their jobs better. So, and that is being replicated in all sorts of enterprises, as you were saying, areas.
There are 2 great startups in the NYU Summer Launchpad. One doing AR for surgeons, taking MRI images and overlaying them in the operating bay. Another one doing AR for construction, essentially letting people see through the walls to the infrastructure of the building. Very interesting. Here and then there to finish us.
Hey guys, thanks for coming. So, thanks to the rise of Pokemon Go, and a lot of companies dropping their own VR headsets, and I know there's been a lot of positive hype related around VR. I just wanted to know, what are some of the ethical questions being raised in the VR community?
Okay, we've got ethical questions again. What are the ethics? What are we worried about?
Well, I think one thing we may see is an empathy rating. I mean, the concept of being present in a space can lead to a lot of challenges for people who are sensitive to the idea that they're in a space. And whether this goes too far in this new world of telling people the triggers of what they're going to read at the universities and so on, I think we may see some sort of rating that is applied to experiences, just like we've done with television and with video games and with the motion pictures, that says, hey, this is intense, you may feel something, so bring your Kleenex.
I would agree. I think it's going to be mandatory, actually, only because the power of VR, I mean, it sits closer to your memory than passively looking at a picture. And so knowing what you're looking at for your own sake, but even more so, I mean, I have an 8-year-old. She's just as obsessed with Pokemon, but even more than that, as sort of an educational tool. She swims with whale in our living room in Brooklyn. So she's not going to know a world when it didn't exist, but I need to know like what's in some of these experiences, because the intensity of it. How many of you have actually tried VR or AR? Okay, so then I mean, the intensity of that experience is just exponentially different than passively watching or reading something. So I think if we're going to be responsible at all, we're really going to have to talk about this. The experts are going to have to come up with some framework with which we look at it.
I did want to mention that I think there are other ethical implications that are extremely important, not for VR in particular, but for mixed reality. If I'm talking to you and I want to say, oh, let me find out about you, and I have to take out my phone and do this social act and take a picture of you, you know I'm doing that. But if you're wearing those glasses, and those glasses are the futuristic, 5 years from now, and it's like everyone in this room, I know your criminal record, I know everything you ever posted on Facebook that you regret. What are we going to do about that? Because at that point, there's no social acknowledgement that someone is poking into your life. So those, to me, are the more important issues that are not going to be solved by the technology. They're going to be solved by us deciding what we want to do about it.
Let's squeeze in one last question.
So I attended a talk earlier by Kyle Lee, and I am profoundly dyslexic, and I want to take this back to the input question. He brought up the idea of voice API, and instead of coding things in or needing a device, and I probably use Siri and Echo more than I even is healthy or should. And I'm wondering if you guys can tell me where we're at in voice control for VR and where the path for that lies.
And maybe I'll add on to that designing VR in VR, which seems to be emerging now. Anybody want to take that one on? Voice as an interface in virtual reality?
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think it's again, I think when you're literally giving a voice to a character, yourself in this case, and it can help you craft a narrative. From our standpoint, it's extremely interesting, and from a production standpoint, it's a challenge to build out all the AI pieces decision making and paths and so on. But as a concept, it is another fascinating tool that when you start to look at visual and vestibular and sensory and smell and haptics and voice, the more agency, the more control, the more power you can give the audience, the more, ideally, the higher quality of an experience you will give them, and theoretically, the more likely they'll be to want to do it again.
That's right. I think it's the combination, right? When you look at haptics, when you look at voice, when you look at audio, it's the combination that makes the immersive experience stand out. And right now, a lot of it is highly visual, and the other areas are catching up.
And building on your part of the question, a lot of us were inspired by the 2009 short film World Builder by Bruce Brannick, where he said, let's just forget about the limitations of the technology and ask if the technology could do whatever we want, what would we want to do? I can talk, I can go like this to build buildings. And I think we have to, some part of us has to look beyond, this is rickety, early stage, low pixel stuff, and we have to say Moore's Law will continue one way or another, and it's going to become very human-centric, and we're not going to suddenly abandon speaking or touching or anything. We're going to build on what we're good at.
Right. It's not too dissimilar than the early stage of the internet when you had to unplug your phone from the wall to plug in and it was a terrible experience, but everyone fundamentally understood there was something massive going on. Right. And so we all sit here and put something on our face and wait for a download and waste some time. And you deal with that because you understand what the end game is.
Yeah. Agreed.
Well, we've run out of time. I want to thank our panelists very much for that excellent 45 minutes. Thank you. And we'll do this again in a year and see if any of your predictions and ideas have come true.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.